He was a black guy from a poor neighborhood, and she was a white girl whose parents couldn't accept their relationship. When society put their love to the test, she made a choice that would change their lives forever. He rose above it all, from racism to corporate schemes, and became one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. But when she reappeared in his life to apologize, their meeting led to a decision that would shock even the most seasoned. But let's start from the beginning. Amy and Jared first met in college, where their connection was instant. She was a white girl from a suburban family with big dreams, and he was a black guy from a working-class neighborhood, determined to break through barriers and make a name for himself. They had chemistry, deep conversations, laughter that made time stand still, and a mutual respect for each other's ambitions. Their relationship felt new and thrilling, full of possibilities. It was their first real love, the kind that feels invincible. At first, they kept their relationship low-key, not wanting to invite unnecessary attention or judgment. But as time went on, it became impossible to hide the fact that they were dating. Once their peers started to notice, the whispers began. In a college environment that prided itself on diversity, their interracial relationship became the subject of harsh gossip. Some people couldn't fathom a white girl and a black guy being together, and others openly questioned how serious it could be. Amy and Jared tried to ignore the whispers at first, thinking they could rise above it. But as the days passed, the pressure became undeniable. Amy began noticing the subtle, but cutting, changes in the way people treated them. Friends who once hung out with them started distancing themselves, avoiding group hangouts or giving them cold, judgmental stares. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was open exclusion. One afternoon, she was with a group of her friends, talking about plans for the weekend, when one of them, a guy she'd known for years, made an offhand remark about Jared being unfit for her. He said it in front of the group, snickering as if it were a joke. "Why are you even with him? He doesn't belong here," he sneered, gesturing to Jared, who stood a few feet away. The words hit Amy like a punch to the gut. She could feel the sting of judgment and couldn't ignore it anymore. Amy started to panic. The more she thought about it, the more she worried about what this would mean for her reputation. Her friends, her classmates, her professors, everyone was watching, and it didn't help that her family had made it clear they didn't approve of her relationship with a black guy. Every time they visited her, her parents subtly expressed their discomfort, making little comments that planted seeds of doubt in her mind. She was torn between her love for Jared and her fear of losing everything she had worked for. Meanwhile, Jared, undeterred by the backlash, threw himself into his studies and his passion for business. He started working on a tech project that he believed could change his life, but he faced obstacles at every turn. Professors dismissed his ideas, claiming that he was too inexperienced or that his background made him unqualified for such ambitious work. Jared knew the real reason behind their dismissiveness. It was because of his skin color. Despite everything, he refused to back down. He was determined to prove them wrong, to prove to himself that he was capable of more than what the world assumed he could achieve. But the weight of constant rejection wore him down, and with each setback, his frustration grew. The tension between Amy and Jared started to mount. Amy, who had always believed in their love, couldn't shake the feeling that her world was starting to fall apart. She felt guilty, trapped by the expectations of her friends and family, but at the same time, her feelings for Jared had never been stronger. She began to resent the pressure that was coming from every direction. Jared, on the other hand, was becoming increasingly disillusioned. He had already sacrificed so much for his dreams, but now it felt like the one thing that made him happy, his relationship with Amy, was slipping away because of something as arbitrary as race. The turning point came on a night they were supposed to spend together. Jared had planned a small get-together with friends, but when Amy arrived, she was visibly distant. She tried to smile, but it was clear something had changed. As the night went on, the tension between them became unbearable. They stepped outside to talk, and that's when Amy finally said it. "Jared, I think we need to break up. This isn't going to work." Jared tried to hold on to the hope that their love could withstand everything. But Amy, her voice trembling, explained that it wasn't about them, but about everything else. The judgment, the whispers, the pressure. "This was always going to be too much," she said softly, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't handle it anymore." Jared was devastated. He had fought so hard for this love, but in the end, he couldn't fight the world for both of them. He felt crushed, but also a sense of resignation. He knew this day might come, but he wasn't ready for it. Amy walked away, leaving him standing in the cold night air, the future he had envisioned, with her crumbling before his eyes. After the breakup, Jared feels like his entire world has been shattered. The love he thought was indestructible slips through his fingers, leaving him alone with the weight of rejection. He's lost Amy, but instead of letting it consume him, he decides to turn the pain into something productive, something that might help him heal and rebuild his life. Jared channels his frustration and hurt into his career, taking a job at a promising startup in the tech world. At first, he's hopeful, eager to prove himself. This is his chance to make something of himself, to leave behind the pain and show the world what he's capable of. But as soon as he starts working there, he realizes that the road to success is not just blocked by personal grief. It's also lined with systemic racism. Almost immediately, Jared notices that his ideas are being ignored, dismissed without even a second glance. In meetings, he's excluded from key conversations. His colleagues, mostly white, make no secret of their disbelief that a black guy like him could have any real insight into the industry. It starts small. A subtle glance here, a comment there. But soon it becomes clear that his race is a factor in his exclusion. When he presents an innovative idea, one that could help the company grow, he's met with cold indifference. A colleague, after dismissing his project, casually says, "Guys like him don't make it in business. They're not built for this." The comment stings more than Jared cares to admit. It isn't just the words that hurt, but the underlying truth behind them. The belief that someone like him, someone from his background, doesn't belong in the room. His passion and ideas are drowned out by the prejudices that others refuse to acknowledge, but are so clearly at play. Despite this, Jared decides not to let the weight of the discrimination crush him. Instead, he uses it as fuel. He's been underestimated his whole life, and now he's going to prove them all wrong. He decides to take the risk of starting his own business, putting everything on the line to create something of his own. Jared quits his job at the startup and begins building his own tech company, pouring all his savings into the venture. He has a vision, a product that could change lives, particularly in underserved communities, and provide opportunities where none existed before. But the reality of entrepreneurship soon sets in. His path is anything but smooth. He faces rejection at every turn, from investors who see him as too risky to government bureaucrats who make it harder than ever to secure the licenses and permits he needs to move forward. Jared finds himself fighting against more than just business challenges. He's fighting a system that's stacked against him, one that doesn't believe in his potential because of the color of his skin. His ideas are rejected time and time again, dismissed as too niche, too ambitious, too unrealistic. Jared's attempts to secure financial backing fall apart one by one. Even when he finds investors who show initial interest, they pull back at the last moment, citing vague reasons. It's clear that his race is the elephant in the room, but no one is willing to say it out loud. As Jared deals with the crushing weight of repeated failure, he starts to question whether he's chasing a dream that's just out of reach, or if it's time to give up. But he's never been one to back down from a fight, and no matter how many doors are slammed in his face, he refuses to let go of the idea that he can make something of himself. Then comes the breaking point. Jared applies for a business loan, hoping that this could finally give him the push he needs to get his project off the ground. He presents his ideas to a bank officer, laying out his plan in meticulous detail. But once again, he's met with resistance. The loan officer looks him over, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a person, and tells him, "I just don't think you're cut out for this kind of responsibility." The rejection stings, but Jared knows deep down what it's really about. It's not about his plan, his passion, or his potential. It's about the fact that he's black, and people like him aren't supposed to succeed in this world. In a last-ditch effort, Jared decides to turn to crowdfunding. a bold move that could either make or break him. He sets up a campaign, sharing his personal story, his struggles, his dreams, and the journey he's been on. He tells people about the systemic barriers he's faced and how he refuses to be silenced by them. He's honest, raw, and vulnerable, putting it all out there for the world to see. To his surprise, the response is overwhelming. People from all over the country, many of whom are strangers to him, begin supporting his campaign. It goes viral, attracting attention from social media, news outlets, and influencers who resonate with his story. His message touches people who understand what it's like to be underestimated, to be held back by the color of their skin, and to fight for a chance at success. Jared's campaign becomes a movement, and with the support of people who believe in his idea, he raises the funds he needs to make his business a reality. This moment marks a turning point in his journey. The dream he thought was slipping away becomes possible again. With the world watching, he takes his first steps toward creating something that will not only change his life, but also change the lives of others who have faced the same barriers he has. Jared's fight is far from over, but this victory, his first real success, is proof that no matter how hard the world tries to hold him back, he will always rise. Years passed, and Jared's company began to flourish. What started as a small, struggling startup was now a thriving business with a growing team and expanding market presence. He had finally reached a level of success that once felt impossible. But as his company gained recognition, new challenges emerged. Challenges far greater than anything he had encountered before. Large corporations, seeing the potential of Jared's business, began to circle like vultures, attempting to buy him out. At first, the offers seemed flattering, offering massive financial backing, resources, and the chance to take his company global. But as he dug into the details of the deals, he realized that these corporations weren't interested in simply investing in his vision. They wanted control. They wanted to erase everything his company stood for. Its focus on diversity, empowerment, and its commitment to changing the industry for the better. The buyouts threatened to strip his company of its heart and soul, forcing Jared to make a tough choice: accept the money and lose the independence that made his business unique, or risk everything to keep his integrity intact. At the same time, the pressure from the media began to escalate. Jared's success made him a target for journalists, eager to find any angle they could exploit to discredit him. The headlines started to paint a picture of his rise, not as a story of hard work and perseverance, but as one of luck or affirmative action. The media dug into his past, focusing on the racial struggles he'd faced, and twisted his success into something that could easily be dismissed. Was Jared's rise due to hard work or simply being in the right place at the right time? They asked. His achievements were downplayed, his background questioned. The system that had once rejected him now tried to redefine his success as something undeserving, a narrative that didn't fit the ideal story of a self-made man. And as if the media attacks weren't enough, legal battles began to surface. Competitors, threatened by Jared's success, filed lawsuits claiming that his company engaged in unfair business practices. The lawsuits were vague and, at their core, unjustified, but they came with the weight of the legal system behind them. Jared found himself in the middle of a full-scale attack, from the media, from his competitors, from a system that didn't want to see a black entrepreneur succeed. These forces were determined to undermine him, to make him the example of what happens when someone like him tries to succeed beyond their prescribed role. It was clear that the system was not designed to allow people like Jared to rise. The more successful he became, the more aggressive the pushback grew. In the face of all this, Jared had a decision to make. He could take the easy route, accept the buyout offers from the corporations that would strip his company of its identity and his story of its truth. He could silence the painful history of racial discrimination he had fought so hard to overcome and present a clean version of success that the world was comfortable with. The temptation was there, the financial security, the recognition, the pressure to fit into a mold that the system had created. But Jared knew that to do so would be to erase the very essence of his journey, the reason why he had fought for this success in the first place. His past, his struggles, the hurdles he faced as a black entrepreneur in a white-dominated industry, were all part of the story that had led him to this point. To erase that would be to deny everything he had worked for. So, in a bold move, Jared decided to take control of the narrative himself. Instead of hiding his struggles, he decided to make them public. He released a statement, one that laid bare the full extent of the difficulties he had faced. He spoke openly about the systemic racism he had encountered, the doors that were closed to him, the opportunities that were withheld simply because of the color of his skin. He told the world about the offers he had received to bury his history and why he refused to take them. He explained how the system was rigged against people like him, against black entrepreneurs who dared to challenge the status quo. This was not just a story of personal struggle. It was a story about a broken system that made it harder for people of color to succeed. The response was overwhelming. The media, which had once criticized him, began to shift its tone. Journalists who had doubted his legitimacy now covered his story with respect. Social media exploded with support as people from all backgrounds rallied behind him. His honesty, his willingness to speak out about the injustices he had faced, became a rallying cry for others who had been overlooked, undervalued, and silenced. Jared's story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that success was not just about beating the odds but about fighting to change the very odds themselves. Investors, once hesitant, now came forward, eager to back him, not just because of his success, but because they believed in his vision. His company, which had been under constant attack, became a beacon of hope, a symbol of the fight against systemic racism in business. The public began to see Jared not just as an entrepreneur, but as a leader in the battle for fairness and equity. His transparency, his willingness to confront the challenges head-on, made him an example of what was possible when you refused to back down. The culmination of this journey was not just financial success, it was a moral victory. Jared had not only fought for his place in the world, he had changed the conversation about what success truly meant. His company became a symbol of what could be achieved when integrity and perseverance met opportunity. His victory was not just his own. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. For every black entrepreneur who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Jared's rise wasn't just about him overcoming the system. It was about him proving that the system could be changed. Amy continued her career after her breakup with Jared, focusing on her work and trying to move past the mistakes she believed she had made. She landed a job at a major company in another city, hoping for a fresh start. At first, everything seemed to be going well. She was succeeding in her role, hitting all the targets and gaining the respect of her colleagues. But as time passed, it became clear that her path to success wasn't going to be as smooth as she had expected. Despite her achievements, Amy began to notice that she was facing the same barriers Jared had warned her about. Her manager, despite her consistent performance, kept blocking her opportunities for promotion. Male colleagues with less experience were getting promoted, while Amy remained stuck at the same level. It was a blatant form of sexism, and though she had tried to ignore it at first, it became impossible to overlook. The more she worked, the more she realized that the world she thought she understood was still full of prejudice and inequality. Amy started to recognize that the very barriers Jared had spoken about were alive and well in her own workplace. She began to see how the same biases she had once dismissed were embedded in the system, keeping people like her from advancing, no matter how capable or successful they were. One day, as she was scrolling through the news, Amy stumbled upon an interview with Jared. He had become a successful CEO of a major company, and the story of his rise was all over the headlines. He was no longer just a businessman. He had become a symbol of resilience and change, known for fighting against the racial discrimination that so often holds back people of color in the business world. In the interview, Jared spoke about the challenges he had faced, the prejudice he had encountered, and how he had built his company into one that stood for inclusivity and social responsibility. Amy was floored. She had heard bits and pieces of his success, but seeing it laid out in full struck her deeply. She was astonished by how far he had come, and by how he had turned his pain into a powerful force for change. In that moment, Amy realized how wrong she had been. She remembered how she had walked away from him all those years ago, putting her career and the opinions of others above her relationship with him. The guilt she had buried for so long came rushing back. Amy realized that breaking up with Jared had been a mistake, and that realization weighed heavily on her heart. She had allowed external pressures and prejudice to cloud her judgment, and now, seeing his success, she couldn't help but feel that she had lost something truly valuable. She wrote him a letter, a simple, sincere apology for everything that had happened. She explained how much she had grown and how her perspective had changed. She admitted that she had made a huge mistake in ending their relationship and expressed how deeply sorry she was. Amy didn't know if he would ever read the letter, let alone forgive her, but she had to try. The guilt and the longing to reconnect with him had become too much to ignore. Jared decided to meet with Amy, though he was unsure of how he would feel about seeing her again. Their reunion was emotionally charged, filled with years of pent-up feelings. The meeting wasn't easy. Jared wasn't ready to forgive her immediately, but he could see that she had changed. She was different, more aware of the world and the barriers that exist. As they talked, Jared shared what he had learned over the years, the lessons about perseverance, about staying true to his vision, and about the importance of fighting against systems that try to suppress people like him. It was a conversation that opened up old wounds, but also allowed for healing. Amy listened intently, and for the first time, she truly understood what he had been trying to explain to her all those years ago. It wasn't just about their relationship. It was about the world they were living in and the inequalities that Jared had faced and overcome. Their conversation wasn't about reconciliation or rewriting the past. It was about understanding each other in a new way, one that was built on the shared experiences of growth, change, and personal victories. While forgiveness wasn't immediate, it was clear that this meeting was a turning point for both of them. They may have lost something once, but they were both beginning to understand how to rebuild it, and this time it was on a stronger foundation. After his meeting with Amy, Jared became an active advocate for inclusivity in business and society as a whole. He realized that his company, which had grown into something successful, could serve as a platform for real change. No longer focused solely on his personal achievements, Jared began to look at how he could use his success to create opportunities for others, particularly Black entrepreneurs and those from marginalized backgrounds. He implemented initiatives within his company that specifically aimed at helping these entrepreneurs by providing mentorship, resources, and business connections. These programs offered not just financial support, but practical advice and career guidance to help break down the barriers that often prevented talented individuals from reaching their full potential. With these programs, Jared's company became a beacon of hope and opportunity, showing that success could be shared and that businesses could succeed while lifting others up. Amy, now fully involved in the process, worked alongside Jared to organize training sessions for his staff, focusing on bias reduction and creating a more inclusive work environment. She developed programs that addressed unconscious biases, helping employees and leadership alike recognize and confront the prejudices that were ingrained in their decision-making processes. These training sessions became a crucial part of the company's transformation, not just focusing on compliance, but genuinely changing the company's culture to one where diversity was embraced and valued. As someone who had personally dealt with discrimination, Amy was deeply invested in making sure these initiatives were effective. She found purpose in her work with Jared, and together, they were laying the groundwork for a more equitable future, not just for their company, but for the business world at large. But Jared wasn't content with just changing his own company. He knew that real change needed to be bigger, that raising awareness on a larger scale was necessary to challenge the deeply embedded biases in the business world. He launched a high-profile campaign aimed at exposing the systemic issues that prevented racial equality in business. The campaign was designed to shift the narrative, to not just focus on individual stories of success, but to address the systemic racism that made it harder for Black entrepreneurs to succeed in the first place. This became Jared's public mission, and he started speaking out at conferences, participating in interviews, and writing about the need for racial justice in the business world. He became the face of a movement that sought to tear down the barriers that kept people like him out of boardrooms and business opportunities. His company's story was no longer just about him. It became a symbol of how business could be a force for good, changing the narrative for Black entrepreneurs everywhere. As the campaign gained momentum, Jared's influence grew. His company became a model for others to follow, showing that diversity and inclusion weren't just buzzwords, but essential values that should be woven into the fabric of every successful business. He became a leading voice in the business community, sought after for his expertise and his commitment to social justice. What started as a personal journey became a global movement, with Jared inspiring entrepreneurs and leaders across the world to tackle racial disparities head-on. His success wasn't just about financial gain. It was about using his platform to create a ripple effect that would transform the business world for future generations. The climax of Jared's journey came at a major press conference, where he and Amy stood side by side to announce a series of new initiatives aimed at combating racism in business. This wasn't just another diversity initiative. It was a comprehensive effort to break down the systemic barriers that had long kept people of color from succeeding. They revealed partnerships with other major companies, working together to create a collective push for racial justice in the business world. Jared's name was now recognized worldwide, not only for his entrepreneurial success, but for his leadership in the fight for racial equality. Amy, standing beside him, felt an immense sense of pride. She realized that the support she had given him, both in his professional and personal struggles, had helped him become the man he was today. Together, they had worked to turn a vision into reality, and now they stood as living proof that change was possible. As they looked out at the press, the cameras, and the world watching them, Jared and Amy knew that this moment was the culmination of everything they had fought for. Their personal victories had merged with their professional achievements, and together they had shattered the barriers that had once stood in their way. They were no longer defined by their past mistakes or the limitations others had imposed on them. In that moment, they were symbols of transformation, standing together not just as a couple, but as partners in a movement that was reshaping the future. Their victory wasn't just a triumph over racism. It was a victory over the system that had tried to hold them back, and a testament to what could be achieved when people worked together for a common goal. It was the ultimate moment of personal and collective victory, a moment where they both understood that the change they had worked toward wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong.